Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Midwestern Marks live broadcast. We got the full crew here, minus Danny. We got Carlos and Noah. We're going to be celebrating Stalin's birthday, talking a little bit about that. We'll react to some short videos that Carlos collected off Instagram related to Israel, Palestine, and related to capitalism and other issues. And also, Hassan Piker recently responded to my appearance on Jubilee's show Middle Ground. So we'll react to some of the interesting points that he made there. So yeah, it should be a stream chock full of entertaining content plus information. We'll get right into it after the intro.
And economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
All right. Looks like we got a ton of people in here already. That's great to see. Obviously, we've had a pretty big influx of viewers thanks to the Jubilee appearance, Hassan Piker, and a handful of viral TikToks that we've had recently. So if you're new, thank you very much for being here with us. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date. We publish all sorts of educational content, do regular streams breaking down news, politics, theory, geopolitics, and everything that's important for Marxists or people who just want to learn about Marxism who don't consider themselves Marxists. But yeah, how you doing today, fellas?
Good. I raced home from work to be able to make this stream, and may or may not have narrowly avoided some ice patches on the way home. But we won't talk about my dangerous driving in my work truck today. I'm great, man. I didn't get to talk to you guys when you were talking to Malumbo about your debate. It was amazing. I got to listen to the whole thing, and congratulations, brother. You killed it on that show. Killed it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it was cool watching Hassan Piker react because he was saying that he thought I did well too. There was one area, particularly when I was talking about the DPRK or North Korea, where we had some areas of disagreement. And I'm hoping to now get on Hassan Piker's show and hopefully talk to him about that. Because obviously we're largely in ideological agreement with him. So I'd love to sit down and have, an open conversation about the DPRK, everything I know about it, what we've learned about it from Professor Derek Ford, who, for those who don't know, we've got like a 2-hour podcast with Professor Derek Ford talking about, who's a socialist organizer and professor, talking about his experiences in the northern and southern parts of Korea, which he knows well and has many friends there. So I'd love to share that information with Hassan Piker. And as this comment says, I guess some Hassan viewers are invading, so we got to be on our best behavior. We always are. But yeah, how about you, Carlos? What's up?
Good. I was able to get an article done this morning, literally like 5 minutes before we came on. It's on Santa Claus and how the figure and narrative of Santa Claus helps us see some of the ideological paradoxes at play in bourgeois society and the gaps between its enunciated values and its realities. But that should be out soon. It should be a Christmas special article. But nothing much. We just finished a semester, so there was a whole lot of grading that I had to do, some papers that I had to finish refining to send to the peer-reviewed philosophy journals, and got that all out of the way, and now my energy is fully focused on the Institute. So if you haven't seen any of my alone news breakdown streams in a little bit over a week, you'll be able to catch more of those maybe every other day now that I'm a little bit freer. How about you, Eddie? How are you doing? Let us know.
Yeah, I was about to ask that same question.
I was gonna say, yeah, I guess I forgot to tell everyone I wrestled at the US Open this week. It didn't go quite as well as I wanted. The first match I got a takedown right away, and then people don't know wrestling. I don't need to explain it, but I was winning and then put myself in a bad position and end up getting pinned. And then won one and then lost a close one to a really good competitor. So the grind continues. There will be another tournament in like 3-4 months. But I have been training intensely for that tournament, and the intense training is going to continue. But I'll get a little bit of a break here and hopefully have less going on for the next few weeks, especially over the Christmas season. So I'm happy to be here streaming with you, although the quest to make the Olympics as a communist continues. And that'll probably continue for the next 4 years, if I had to guess.
Hell yeah, brother. That's awesome. Speaking of articles and all that stuff, real quick, I just want to update everybody. Everybody's been asking me about the reproletarianization pamphlet, when it's going to be out. It's finished. It's just in line behind some other stuff, okay? In the meantime, I'm working my ass off as well. I got some stuff that's going to be coming out in Newsweek again very soon. Some other stuff specifically for our site, and another book right around the corner, but that's just me. I'm excited I get a Christmas break at work as well, since I do finished carpentry, which is usually in people's houses, and they don't want anybody in their house, during Christmas and New Year's and all that. So I got a whole week off. So it'll be good to be able to focus on the Institute. We got the new basics of Marxism class that's going to be running, and I got a whole new show that's going to be starting up that we got our social media team working on stuff for, that I'm really excited about. It's going to be a call-in show. So yeah, that's yeah. And yeah.
No, you make it sound like Americans like spending Christmas fully alone. They don't want anyone in their house. You mean any strangers? Eddie with a dope new shirt from a very anti-communist film, but I love the aesthetics.
You just got to root for the bad guy.
Yeah. Which is actually the good guy here. But
right.
I wanted to say something before we continue. Just for the folks that perhaps are not athletes, I have been able to be best friends with Eddie for like 4 years now, and the discipline that he has, the commitment that he has to his sport, the way that whenever he takes a loss or doesn't have the outcome be the outcome that he expected or hoped for, the way he bounces back, and instead of even quitting like most people would do, or going back to doing the same sort of effort and training, he always intensifies it. In the last like 3-4 months, this man has been borderline insane, working out 3 times a day, training 3 times a day. And after he had an outing that he didn't feel like it was what he hoped, his mind didn't go to any of the places that most people's minds would have gone to. It went to, now I got to train harder for the next one in 4 months. So that is an extremely admirable quality in the human being, perhaps the most admirable quality anyone can have, which is their work ethic. And I think that reflects itself both in the success that he has as a wrestler and in the success that he has as a political commentator and as a political organizer. So just extremely proud to call this man my brother.
I really appreciate that, bro. For real. And yeah, I guess resilience has always been a trait that I've had. And to tie that into the struggle for socialism and the class struggle, like just as this comrade says, winners need to learn from their losses. But we know from reading history and from reading Marx and from reading Hegel, history does not move in a straight line. It zigs and zags, it goes backwards and forwards. there are revolutions and counter revolutions, right? So if you get discouraged, if you live in this nihilistic world of, oh, you know, the uprisings in 2020 over George Floyd didn't lead to a full-on revolution in the establishment of socialism, I'm just going to give up, right? I'm going to give up because I didn't see tangible change right away. Then no change is ever going to be achieved, right? You need to learn from your losses, learn from times where, you know, or learn from revolutionary moments where we weren't able to change things for the better, and lay the groundwork for the next revolutionary moment, right? Lay the theoretical foundation among the working class so that when there is a political crisis in this country, they can come forward with a plan, say, we have a plan to fix this. It's called socialism. Here's exactly what we need to do and exactly how we throw the capitalists who are ruining our country out of power. So, yeah, just don't be nihilistic, be resilient, and always know you can bounce back. Because I've taken, like, I used to get completely devastated, but, you know, you take enough hard losses and you realize it's not the end of the world and that shit does happen, and that you can learn from them. So
1000%, brother. It's funny. I gotta echo Carlos, that extremely proud to call you my brother as well. But this is my son. I have a 14-year-old son, for anyone who's unaware of this. And he's got this tendency to, if he's not immediately good at something, to just set it aside, right? I think a lot of kids have that, especially in our society right now. It kind of trains people to do that. And so I'm like, I tell him, I'm like, look, you think Eddie would give up on this? You want, because he was commenting on your wrestling and stuff. I'm like, you want to be like that? You got to work at it. Eddie didn't get like that at this level by just giving up the moment he couldn't do something in wrestling. He kept going and worked through it and got better at it. And I think that's important. We should all be a little more like Eddie in that regard, I think. I'm looking at the chat right now, and everybody's already asking about Stalin.
Yeah.
So I also want, before we get to Stalin, though, real quick, brother, I also think it's funny that as Carlos was talking about that, I couldn't help but hear Hegel in what he was saying. Necessary failures, right? Failure is a necessary part of getting to where we are now. And I mean, that's all there is to it. Really. Sorry, go ahead with what you were going to say, Carlos.
Yeah, I think we have a few nice ways to set up the conversation on Stalin. For some reason, this person with the Trotsky picture and name is making amazing points. That
shows that I don't know. Go ahead.
Here is Matt Wiggins with an interesting question that I think we can approach. By the way, it was the anniversary of Stalin's birth yesterday, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it'd be good to break down the figure of Stalin for at least a few minutes. For me, he's someone that is definable by a category that Hegel introduces, as that of the agent of history. He's a hero. Stalin is simply a hero. That doesn't mean that he's this great man of history, divorced from the concrete conditions that produced him, but that he's an organic individual produced by his time, and that because of whatever uniqueness he had in his character and the special circumstances that he came into, he was able to rise up and play the figure of a heroic individual. You know, one of the agents of history, the heroes of history. Of course, he's someone who definitely has contradictions. You know, who in his time as the leader of the great people state, obviously made things that could be considered mistakes from hindsight. But a lot of these are overblown by the ruling class and by those who call themselves Marxists, but objectively always end up aligning with the ruling class. Stalin was the leader of the only socialist country, the only people's worker state at the time, and we know how imperialism treats worker states today. We know how hybrid warfare functions, how blockades function, and how hurtful they are for the development of socialism. Now, imagine that at a time when you're literally the only worker state, and you have more than 100,000 spies. You have people within the party, the old Bolshevik guard, trying to overthrow you. You have this general culture inherited from Tsarism that engages in polemics through very fierce condemnation that legitimizes terrorism as a viable form of political change. You had events like the killing of Kirov, someone that was close to Stalin, that was applauded by some of the older Bolsheviks. So it was very contradiction-ridden, contradictions inherited, not produced by Stalin, rooted in the objective conditions of the historical moment that he had to deal with. So that 30% negative has to be also contextualized. And that 30 to 70% is an analysis that the Chinese come up with. 70% good, 30% bad. That's something that they apply to both Stalin and Mao. But, undoubtedly a positive figure. A lot of literature, modern literature that you can read on Stalin. The work of Grover Furr, I think, is very good. I know there's some people that don't like it, but I've read him published in various academic journals, and it's been pretty good on questions of the Stalin era. And the book that Eddie just pulled up, Stalin, Critique of the Black Legend from Domenico Losordo, is another superb text. There's others, but I think that Stalin Losordo one is perhaps the best introduction to demystifying the myth that the bourgeoisie has created around the figure of Stalin.
This one is so good, and it's so good to frame it as a critique, because he's not trying to lionize Stalin or pretend like he's this perfect great man of history. He's just giving a very objective not objective, but a materialist analysis of the USSR at that time, and contextualizes all of Stalin's decisions. And when you contextualize everything that he did, you get a vision of Stalin totally different from this mythical version that were given by the bourgeois propagandists, where he was just evil and murdering people and eating their babies and their babies, as Noah would say, and eating all the rice or all the grain with a giant spoon and purposefully starving people, right? All these things we hear about Stalin. A lot of them are just completely fabricated, or a lot of them, when you read the truth, it's far more complicated. Right, like somebody who got thrown in jail happened to be collaborating with the Nazis per se. Like that's Losordo shows that to be a case during a lot of the so-called purges in the USSR. Sorry, I didn't mean to hide that comment. That was an accident. This book is fantastic. I had something else to say, framing it as a critique. Oh yeah, and then when you read what the Chinese communists say about the USSR, it's the same thing, because again, they're not being dogmatic about it. They're not saying, how do we copy exactly what the USSR did, which was a mistake that a lot of communist parties made at the time, trying to apply what the Soviet communists and the Bolsheviks were doing, despite the fact that each country needs to apply or build socialism in a unique way. So the Chinese communists are honest, that didn't work, or, maybe that worked for them, but it wouldn't work for us. They're honest. And when you see an honest analysis of Stalin's legacy, you realize how ridiculous the legacy of Stalin is that we're fed by the bourgeois propagandists, where he's literally just a comic book villain. Like when I was talking to Ty Lopez on Jubilee, the way he talked about Stalin was absurd, as if Stalin was running every single person's life in the country, or he was running every single sector of the government, like things that aren't even physically or humanly possible, right? For one person to be running an entire government and every branch of government by themselves and making all the decisions. It's not even humanly, physically possible. It doesn't even make sense if you think about it. How would anyone have that much time and energy? But, people are convinced by the anti-communist propaganda that that's how it was. Stalin was making all the decisions for millions of people, ruling with an iron fist. So, yeah, check out these books. Check out what Chinese scholars have said about Stalin. And then check out all the videos Noah's done about Stalin, because he's our resident Stalin expert here at the Institute.
Yeah, I actually began my whole road towards learning Marxism with Stalin. My grandparents are from the Soviet Union, and my grandmother, literally until the day she died, years and years after Stalin had died, prayed for Stalin before bed, right? That was just how they viewed him in the Soviet Union, and how my grandparents viewed him, the hero that defeated Hitler, right? So I'm very aware that I come from these from a very different angle as most people beginning to learn about this do. That's why I like what you just said, Eddie, about beginning with Loserdo, right? And why I think this book getting translated into English is so huge, because it does frame it as a critique, right? It's not holding Stalin up on this pedestal that the entire communist movement and people that, you know, really saw him the way my grandparents did do, right? In my house, my dad, or my grandparents' house, my dad would not have done well if he would have criticized Stalin in front of his parents, right? But that's neither here nor there. In America, you need that sort of, he's not perfect. And this coming out is a really good way to do that, because before him, there weren't balanced views that actually entertained the idea that Stalin was not a cartoon character, right? I feel like I'm saying that all the time. I've recently had a bunch of people that are under wild misconceptions bothering me on the internet about this, because there were some victims of communism people sort of attacking my social media, and the number of deaths Stalin supposedly magically, you know, ordered just kept changing. And it's always this wild, ridiculous view that otherwise smart people just are taught to like set their critical thinking aside and embrace, right? Stalin, you know, was this evil dictator who killed everyone who disagreed with him. And, you know, you say, well, here's, you know, records of him being defeated in the political arena. And they're like, you actually believe that? Like, how can you turn your brain off like that? So the old stuff that we would go to before Loserdo's book was like, there was a Belgian communist, Ludo Mortens, or Martins, or however you pronounce it, that wrote this book, Another View of Stalin. And it comes out of the pre-Khrushchev era, and it's just flowery praise, you know, and someone just beginning to question all of the mainstream lies about the Soviet Union and Stalin. They're just going to dismiss that. That's all they're going to do. They're going to think it's all lies. And so it's a good middle ground. That's all I was trying to say.
And just to give, because I noticed I pulled this question up and we didn't answer it, but the historical friction, I think part of the flaws, you know, what's considered in that 30%, was the relationship that the Comintern took to socialist struggles in various nations. It was assumed that since it was the Soviet Union that, the Bolsheviks that had won the struggle before anyone for political power, that other countries should try to imitate what it was that the Bolsheviks did in coming to power. And what you ended up having was a bemusing of the universal for the particular, you know, a confusing of, you know, what was it that at the more abstract level allowed the Bolsheviks to succeed, and how did that concretize itself to specifically Russian conditions, and how would that necessitates the concretizing of that struggle in various different forms throughout different countries. Socialism cannot be, as Mariátegui teaches us, a carbon copy. It has to be a creative creation of the peoples who waged the struggle. So you have a situation like in China, where there was deep frictions between the Comintern, Stalin, and the Communist Party, because they were reading something like the KMT, the Kuomintang, as a national liberation struggle akin to those occurring in India, in various parts of Africa, etc. And so, you know, you had even parts of the Bolsheviks that asked the communists to get rid of Mao because they saw him as this ultra-leftist figure that would not ally with the Kuomintang. That was a bad reading. That's a reading that's rooted in not being present in the concrete reality of China and not having the concreteness and analysis that the communists were able to have. So the idea of socialism with Chinese characteristics that gets popularized after reform and opening up, its origin is in this epoch where the Chinese communists realize that they can't follow directly the Soviet model, that they need socialism with their specific characteristics, that the struggle has to look like something that's rooted in their immediate reality, not something that was just copied and pasted from a different context in a different country at a different time. So those were some of the contradictions that I think that we have deeply learned from in the years since.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Eddie.
No, you go ahead. No, I don't have that much to say on this.
Okay, I was just thinking. I didn't know you were. Anyway, I think that this mistaking of universals for particulars has always been the problem in the West. We've always had problems with dogmatism and stuff like that. And I think a lot of that actually stems out of the Soviet Union and their necessity, right? And what was going on at the time. This develops into a very, not to mistake the word for its more philosophical use, particular form of socialism, right? And the Comintern was heavy-handed many times, like trying to get Mao fired, for example, right? And this sort of leads all of the parties affiliated with it that need Soviet aid, that rely on Soviet aid, into this more dogmatic position, right? There's a story, and don't get me wrong, I'm not an ultra-leftist. I'm not like a huge fan of Nelson Peary, but he tells this in his book where he's in a party meeting, and he's beginning to read into Yugoslavia and Tito, and he's talking about it and their theory they're working out, and he says, this guy seems like a revisionist to me. Like, this sounds like revisionism, the way we talk about it. Everyone in the party was like, what are you talking about? Yugoslavia are our allies. Do you really think the party is the place for you? Right? 2 days later, the Daily Worker, the Communist Party's newspaper, comes out. Big headline: Stalin condemns Tito revisionism. That whole like scenario I just described, never spoken of again, right? And that's the issue. It's why we're only able to now begin formulating American Marxism, right? Leaning on Du Bois as who gives us our particular class struggle and ability to understand that. So in regards to Yugoslavia and the Sino-Soviet split, all of this, I think political necessity oftentimes leads into these dogmatic avenues that have positive outcomes or necessary reasons we go into them at the time, but ultimately lead us into a place where the negatives begin outweighing those.
Yeah, I mean, just to give final thoughts on this, if I remember right, Yugoslavia had more of like a market socialist system. And when you're reading the internal debates of the early Communist Party of China, there are areas where they're like, well, we want to do more of a Yugoslavia style system. Like, there were areas where they felt that Yugoslavia's economy was working better than the Soviet economy, or could have been, or some of the methods that they were using could have worked for China. I totally agree with what both of you guys said. It's about not being dogmatic and applying Marxism and building socialism uniquely in each country based on that country's conditions. It looks like we got a super chat here. Anyone familiar with Gu Hailang's work on Stalin? I am not. Thank you so much for the $2 super chat, Ted, but I'm not going to be much use on your question, unfortunately.
Me neither.
Okay, so maybe that's one for us to check out. We also got a question for Noah here, but anybody can take a stab at it. Do you think that some of the de-Stalinization under Khrushchev was necessary? The guy, meaning Stalin, was about as good as anyone could have been in his position. As people who are anti-great man in the USSR, it seems that he was almost a deity at his death. Obviously, they went too far, but was some amount of bringing him back to earth necessary? So basically, to give historical context for those who don't know, after Stalin died, he was basically a deity. He had this huge cult of personality around him. People loved him. Material conditions had increased greatly under Stalin's rule. Industrialization had been carried out. Living conditions were better than they had ever been. People had been taught to read and write. Cultural life was better than it had ever been. Before that, they were living in a semi-feudal czarist monarchy with no rights for anybody, essentially. So it was much better. And he defeated the Nazi menace when, a lot of military analysts at the time thought they were going to get wiped out by Germany. So he had this sort of huge cult of personality. And then Khrushchev comes to power and gives this secret speech, basically trashing Stalin, saying Stalin was an evil dictator. He massacred all these people. He was evil behind the scenes, not a good socialist. And then there's this process of de-Stalinization. So this person's asking, was any of that de-Stalinization necessary, or was it all garbage?
Do you want me to just answer, or do you want to go at it, brother?
They asked you, and you know better than me.
So you got to understand exactly what Eddie was just saying first, right? Stalin, my grandparents are very typical of Soviet people. He was the hero that saved them from the Nazis. And to be in that place where you know that the most advanced force in the world is not just coming to fight you, but exterminate you. Exterminate you, enslave you, and take everything you have. Right? To be saved from that, to be organized in a way that it's not even just someone coming in with a cape, that you're helping do this yourself, and to feel that and be part of it. And at the same time, be part of building up a nation out of nothing. Out of the quote from Stephen Kotkin, famous anti-communist, was that Stalin took the Soviet Union from mud huts to nuclear weapons in a handful of decades. And that's true, right? So this is the shadow that Khrushchev is under, right? Also, Khrushchev has always been a political opponent of Stalin. So the whole notion that you couldn't disagree with Stalin, Khrushchev did all the time. And to sort of explain who he was sort of, if you think of sleazy politicos here in the US, that was him, right? That doesn't mean he didn't believe in communism. It doesn't mean he wasn't a Marxist, which his Marxism was not good. But it means that this is what the world around him created this and left this hole that Khrushchev filled, and the role that Khrushchev played in building things, right? And so he gets to this place where he believes, at the very least, that something has to be done in order for any changes, which were very necessary at the time because the US had nuclear weapons and had just proved they would use them. So for any changes to be made, and sort of backtracking from any Stalin era policies, he had to get out from under that shadow. Now, did he do it the right way? Did he take advantage of all of this and make wild blunders like releasing thousands of Banderite scum from the prison system? Yes. But he was also that guy that stood up at the UN and said, your children will be communists. You're welcome. He believed that too, right? So he's not one thing or the other. If we're to give him the same treatment that the Chinese give Stalin, I give him the exact opposite number. He's roughly 30% okay and 70% negative.
Wow, what a great way to put it.
Thank you.
I don't know about that. I think you're being a bit unfair with Khrushchev. He was horrible, but he helped Cuba a lot. He prevented nuclear war a few times.
Yes, détente.
Pretty solid. I don't know.
Can I say one more thing on détente before you go, brother? Détente is giant. You got to understand, like, where the Soviets were, our ruling class had literally proved that they would destroy humanity to stop communism. And here's the thing. The Soviets' computers were decent, but they were behind the US, right? Their missile tracking system was not up to par. And there's a story, a famous story. He does. It's okay. This is like the one thing we disagree on. Anyway, there's this famous story, Soviet soldier, right? Responsible for like watching these systems gets an alert. The US had launched nukes at Moscow, right? And what does he do? He says, I can't do it. I cannot begin nuclear Armageddon. He tells his superior arrests him, and then his superior thinks twice about it. He can't do it either. It turns out that was a false positive. It was sun bouncing off of clouds. And these two Soviet soldiers saved the world. We never hear about them. But that was because it was during détente, right? So we have to make sure, as horrible as Khrushchev could be, there were some things that even if he did them and took advantage, they saved humanity.
Oh, I agree. I agree. And I don't think we disagree. It's just that I'd like a 50-50 on Khrushchev.
I'm firm on 70-30. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much to Andreas Grondel for the 27 Swedish dollars. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Leon. Jesus Christ.
If you knew the communists of that era, the corn jokes are hilarious, by the way.
Very Iowan of them. Thank you so much, Trotsky in the 21st century, for the $2 super chat. Duck Hash Browns. Oh my God, I haven't seen Duck Hash Browns in a minute. Gifted 5 Midwestern Marks memberships. Thank you so much for doing that.
That's huge. Thank you, Duck Hash Browns.
Oh man, yeah. Do we want to go to one of the videos that we had planned for today? I think we hammered out the.
We got one more super chat. We could try to tackle this quick. Thank you, Andreas. Would be interesting to hear your thoughts on the purges and the number 700,000 deaths. What was going on? Well, that book by Lacerdo, The Critique of Stalin, is probably the best analysis of the purges that I've ever heard, in terms of like looking through the archives and seeing what the people who were put away were actually accused of and what they were actually involved with at the time. And you see, there were like a lot of them were like plotting coups or collaborating with the Nazis, and you know that it just is what it is. So, you know, I don't know what the exact number is. My thing with the purges is it was an effort to use the state and use state authority to, one, help beat the Nazis, but also to keep the revolution going and put away these counter-revolutionaries who were trying to destroy what the USSR was trying to build, which would, you know, with the Nazis at their doorstep preparing to attack in Stalin's era, would have been disastrous for the country. And, you know, it's not like Stalin was just throwing people in jail. You know, there were trials that were held. And even at the height of the purges and the height of the Soviet gulags, they had far less people imprisoned than what we have in the United States today. Far, 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 far less. So that's my take on it. But
yeah, can I add one real quick thing, or did you want to go, Carlos? Okay, cool. So again, there's a lot they leave out in these narratives, which is how they give them to you, right? So, like Eddie was saying, people were literally like plotting coups, assassinating Bolsheviks, right? And just because someone was in the Communist Party in this period does not, or participated in the revolution, does not mean they continued being a good communist or were a good communist to begin with. A lot of people join opportunistically, right? And they're there. And I mean, there's this great book called Molotov Remembers, and he focuses on this era. They didn't know who they could trust, right? Because there were so many of these, like anarchists, for example, embedding themselves within the Soviet system and using that to cause chaos. You have Yezhov, right, who was using the purges. He was head of the NKVD, and he was trying to get as many innocents either kicked out of the party or arrested as humanly possible, right? And Stalin this whole time is criticizing people for overzealous purging, for kicking innocent and good communists out of the party, or having good people arrested. And he's saying, you guys got to slow your roll on this shit. We have a court procedure. Put people through it. Find out who's actually guilty. And that's important to remember when we're talking about that.
Can I say something just real quick on this topic? Especially since we have Trotsky in the audience. In siding with Stalin, we might agree that objectively the forces that were trying to coup the government were acting in reactionary ways. That doesn't mean that at this level of subjective disposition, the people who participated in those acts didn't see themselves as genuine revolutionaries. I have no doubt in my mind that whether it's Trotsky, Bukharin, whoever it was, they believed that the things they were doing were for the good of socialism, for the good of the revolution. No, I think they were wrong.
Trotsky.
I think they were wrong. I think that at the level of objective actions, they were acting in as reactionary a fashion as you can act. But at the level of subjective disposition, and that's why a lot of people, I think, end up falling for these figures, because you read them and you still have that aura of, you're dealing with someone who agrees with socialism, who, claims to be a Marxist or is a Marxist. And so, again, like, we can condemn these figures as, for the roles that they played objectively or for whatever other reason in these periods. But at the subjective level, I think it's important to note that just like today, today we have a bunch of ultras that are objectively wrong, are objectively siding with the imperialists. But at the subjective level, they think that what they're doing is not treason to socialism, but what socialism needs. These are people that are confused, that they're operating under false consciousness. And hopefully, they overcome that and change, and a lot of them have. And I think that's a more complex analysis of the psychologies of a lot of these individuals, and why some people retrospectively fall for them and can't see the objectively anti-revolutionary role that they played in certain periods in these struggles.
Great points all around. I want to answer this. Eddie, what do you think of Joseph Tito? Tito was largely based 70-30 on Tito. He was a G. The socialist economy was first in Yugoslavia was first dismantled by IMF and World Bank infiltration throughout the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And then what remained of the socialist economy, NATO tried to basically decimate and bomb. They carved out part of Serbia and created this country called Kosovo after funding and arming the Kosovo Liberation Army, which for years had been listed as a terrorist, extremist, separatist group. But when the U.S. found it convenient to back and arm this group because they were fighting against the Serbian government and what remained of the socialist economy, the U.S. funneled a bunch of arms and weapons into them. So took them a long time to dismantle the strong socialist sort of market economy that Tito had built up in Yugoslavia. And there was friction between him and Stalin too. But like we said earlier, I think that was just a result of Tito understanding Yugoslavia's unique conditions and what they needed.
Yeah. I was about to pull that same one up.
Oh, were you? Sorry, I tried to pull another one up, but go for it.
Well, I was just gonna say there's an interesting story that some old heads told me that I don't know if it's true or not, so I don't want to mention their names. That Mao at one point went to Tito to talk about an anti-Soviet communist alliance, and Tito turned him down because he wanted to maintain a neutrality and keep a more united sort of communist bloc of the world. But brother Charles here says Lenin was shot by an ultra leftist. That's true. He was shot by an anarchist. And I just wanted to say one brief thing on this. In the U.S., there's this sort of view that anarchists and communists are all on the same page, and communists and anarchists eventually want the same thing. We just have different ways to get there, as if communists are just anarchists with extra steps or something, right? Which isn't the case. Historically, we have had some alliances here, but also historically, anarchists have been some of the biggest counter-revolutionaries in history, and we need to recognize the foundational philosophical premises that can lead them to this, right? Why was Makhno pillaging the Ukrainian countryside? Taking everyone's money and saying they were abolishing it, right? Why did an anarchist shoot Lenin? Why was it anarchists allying with the czarists at Kronstadt to try to fight against the revolution at a pivotal moment, right? Why is it we keep seeing ultra-lefts and anarchists in the US finding revolutionary sounding words to side with the ruling class? There's sort of assumptions and premises of their thought baked into all of this that, we're not going to go over right now, but it's a good thing to remember.
Yeah, and for anyone interested, Eddie has done really good videos on the basis of Parenti's work on the pact as well. I'll try to link those now. Oh, there it is. Yeah. It was for quite a bit of time attached to our link tree as well, so I'm pretty sure you can still find it there.
Yeah, here, this is the video. Sorry, I had myself muted. Parenti and the myth surrounding the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It's pretty easy to debunk the idea that the pact equaled a Nazi and communist alliance once you know the actual history and once you know how the Western imperialists supported Germany up until the last minute because they wanted them to weaken the USSR, and then Germany, started attacking the other capitalist nations, and then the other capitalist nations finally got drawn in. But even during Hitler's rise to power, the Soviets and Stalin were saying, look at this, let's do something about this. They were ready to intervene, and they continually requested approval from the Western powers, who said no, because they wanted, like I said, they wanted Nazi Germany to help destroy communism for them. Yeah. Check out that video if you get a chance.
And just real quick, Eddie, with this one, we also have an interview with Grover Furr talking about Holodomor, which is where a lot of these deaths are attributed. So make sure to check that out. And this is an area where it's really only a very tiny portion of bourgeois ideologues, specifically those tied to the neo-Nazi Ukrainian lobbies that hold on to the idea of Holodomor, which is what bumps the deaths up to 20 million. Even mainstream bourgeois historiography does not agree that what they call Holodomor was something intentional. It was just a famine, and it was the last of its kind because the Stalinist or Stalin's industrialization policies were so successful that this famine-prone region never had any after that because of that. But my God.
All aboard the Holodomor bus. Listen, if the Holodomor bus actually happened, the Canadian government wouldn't have needed to buy a bus to convince people that it happened. Well, the famine happened, but it wasn't intentionally created by Stalin.
I'll say it like this. Trotsky hates, and Trotskyites hate Stalin perhaps more than most people, even the bourgeois ideologues themselves. The Trotskyites themselves reject the narrative of Holodomor. You could look at the World Socialist website. They've actually done relatively decent work debunking Holodomor.
Yes. This is a really interesting question. Did Stalin play a crucial role in the communist revolution in China? Thank you, Midwestern Marx Institute. Excellent conversation. Thank you for the $5 super chat, Sean Moon. I don't know how much material support Stalin gave to China. I know he gave aid to Mao when the revolution was successful. And actually, I haven't read this whole article yet, but I found this scholarly article on Stalin's role in the communist victory in China. And Stalin gave strategic analysis to Mao that was useful for the Chinese communists. He analyzed China's conditions. talked about how they were different than Russian conditions in various senses, and talked about the importance of the worker-peasant alliance, this Leninist idea that in a country where you don't have capitalism fully developed and there's a lot of peasants, they can ally with the workers to help overthrow the feudal and capitalist ruling class. So without the worker-peasant alliance idea presented by Lenin, or first conceptualized by Lenin, the revolution in China would have been completely impossible. It was largely a peasant economy at the time. So the USSR and Stalin did play a crucial role in the communist revolution in China. I don't know how much material support they gave them, but definitely played a big role.
Yeah, and that's actually where the big split Trotsky and Stalin split begins, is this Leninist principle. Trotsky's whole permanent revolution thing was sort of, Lenin called it half a Menshevik theory, because he was basically saying that a peasantry would have all of its revolutionary fervor run out, right? Which is why they needed to force this permanent revolution onto the West, use Russia, blah, 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 right? Interestingly, during this time and Stalin's involvement in the Chinese Revolution, the Comintern and Stalin basically keep Mao's wife out of politics with them for a few years, which is a fun little fact, especially if you're aware of the damage the Gang of Four caused later on. Stalin called that shit.
Big Spoon Man ate all my wheat. I mean, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. We most historians don't believe the Holodomor, but we can discredit the idea or the possibility that Stalin could have eaten all the Ukrainian grain with one big giant spoon.
Eddie's killing it today with the
that spoon. Let's put that back up. I want to see the spoon again.
There's some pictures where it's like an ice cream scooper.
My God.
That's too
That's
good.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sam. I repeat this every time, but Sam is the sort of archetype of how we like to see people develop. Sam's been through all of the Institute's Marxism school classes and has taught classes himself on the PFLP, and is someone who's extremely active as an organizer and is not hoarding the things he learns. He shares it with the folks in his community and his workplace. So that's very important. It's important for the audience to learn from the things we're saying here, for us to learn from y'all as well. But it's perhaps most important to apply it in the conversations we have with our coworkers, our community members, etc. Because the name of the game is winning new hearts and minds. If everyone solidifies and agrees on everything within the already existing communist left, we're still nothing. We need the people. So talk to folks and apply what you learn.
And I believe Sam actually started as a Vaush fan, which shows why we shouldn't give up on anybody, and that we need to combat these radical recuperators, these people who take socialist sentiment and funnel it into a big pile of liberalism, which is all that Vaush does. Thanks, Sam.
I'm going to say it one more time. I'm proud to call Sam my brother as well. I'm sure all of us are.
Heck yeah. Duck Hashbrown, $10 super chat. Thank you. We're just getting the super chats rolling in. We're not even able to get to our videos because they're coming in too fast. Maybe we could be quick with this one, but thank you so much, Duck Hashbrowns. Gifted 5 memberships and now gave $10. It's a lot of donations for one day, so appreciate you. Buddy of mine claims to be a Trotskyist and says his letters in exile swayed him. Are you all familiar or have any content? I'm more on the Stalin side, but also not super well read on the USSR. I will say that there were people who met Trotsky when he was in exile in Mexico, and just being around the Trotskyists convinced them to not be Trotskyists anymore, because they just thought they were a bunch of complainers throwing shade at the revolutionary government that defeated the Nazis. And tried to badmouth and destroy that government at a time when that's what the Nazis were doing. That's what the Nazi propaganda was doing. And he was doing that from the left, saying I'm a communist, but yes, the USSR is evil and Stalin is evil and everything they're doing is evil. But yeah, I've talked to people like that too who read Trotsky. Yeah, I haven't read him that in depth though. I don't know what has. Oh.
Can I say one thing on his letters? For you to call. So regarding Trotsky's letters, I forget what school it was. I want to say it was Harvard. Had a giant archive of Trotsky's letters, right? And there was a Trotskyist, I want to say James Cannon, don't quote me on that, but responsible for organizing them and archiving them, blah, blah, blah. And it turned out a bunch of them got stolen as they were being made public. Wonder why that is, right? Because they were letters. The part of the archive missing was around World War II. And Trotsky was charged with collaborating with the Nazis at this time. Also, when looking into his actual letters, we do have that weren't stolen. Try to, if he mentions something in Pravda, look for that issue of Pravda. 90% of the time, he is lying to you about what it said. No offense to the Trot in the audience here, but he was lying. There's a reason Lenin called him a flopping fish, after all.
Yes. Anything to add on that, Carlos, or ready to move on?
Yeah, I'm ready. I ran out to find the Frida bag because I saw where your comment was going, and I ended up forgetting what the question was in the process. But yeah, I mean, look at the time period where Trotsky is allowed to roam freely in Berlin, and think about what was happening to communists in Berlin at that time. And just ask yourself, if communists are being murdered in Germany, why is one of the most important communist leaders of the sole socialist state existing at the time allowed to just roam freely with his kids in Berlin? That's something that, I visited the Trotsky Museum in Mexico City, and they put the dates of his trip to time in exile in Germany. And if you know your history, you know what was going on at that time. It's kind of sketchy. So
for sure. All right, let's jump into our first video then. The first one, Carlos said the libertarians are going to love this. We have a video about the Pentagon and taxes, and how taxes are used to pay for the military and military industrial complex, I believe. I haven't yet seen this video, so I'm excited to watch it for the first time, but got anything to say before we jump in?
Just a tip, zoom in a little bit. That's what I do with the IG things, and know where the little unmute button is so that you restart and then unmute quick, because if not, it's pretty difficult.
Gotcha. All right, let's listen to this video.
Oh, I think it's muted. Just
sorry, my screen share was muted.
Yeah.
Just as a heads up, we lost about $3.8 trillion this year in military spending that we're currently not able to track. Oh, yeah. We also have about $5 trillion that we spent during the pandemic that we don't really know where it went. On that note, we have a $30 million F-35 fighter jet that we're actually not able to track right now either. It got lost. Speaking of missing money, there is this single mother in Alabama who hasn't paid us $2.12. So I'm thinking we send her to jail. Just as a
Oh, that's a great video. That's a great
It's perfect. And it shows a while back there was some people on the left celebrating the addition of like 100 new IRS agents. It's so incredibly stupid, and you debunked it excellently when it came up. But what these institutions defend is the ruling class, whom they don't enforce. They don't have the same level of scrutiny with working people's taxes as they do with the taxes of the wealthy. And for working people, it affects them a whole lot more. you know. So the folks on the social democratic left that phrase socialism as just taxation, we're going to tax more. That's not an appealing message to working people who have a big ass chunk of their paycheck taken out in the form of taxes and who have to pay taxes on literally everything that they buy. So
I said
Yeah,
that in
there
the
were-
Jubilee video too. They were talking about taxation. I'm like, I'm a socialist. I'm not here to defend taxation. Like, yeah, there may be a role for increased taxes and funding social programs under a socialist government, but under a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, under a dictatorship of capital, which is what we live under, the form that taxes take are just sucking more wealth out of the working class to pay for things for the ruling class, whether it be subsidies, just straight up handouts, or imperialist interventions abroad that clear the way for multinational corporations to exploit foreign countries. So yeah, the under capitalism, they're a way to extract money out of people. And when Biden expanded the number of IRS agents, I was shocked at the amount of leftists who were mad at me and saying, no, this is a progressive thing. This is a good thing. More taxes. We need more people to suck more taxes. All those people are going to do is harass poor people, harass working class people who can't afford to pay their taxes or who missed a tax payment. That is all that the IRS does when they serve the capitalist state. They're just another body of the state for suppressing and extracting value out of the working class. So it shows a naivety that social democrats and leftists have about the capitalist state, that they thought Biden adding a bunch of new IRS agents was going to be a good thing for the American workers.
I also want to say there were certain right opportunists in certain organizations that should know better, saying the same thing, like acting as if these IRS agents were going to go after the ruling class, as if that had ever happened. Like if you're a leader of people and you call yourself, a revolutionary, you should understand society better than to start celebrating these things. But when you don't, we all see through you, and we all see that you're just someone championing the establishment, and it just sort of opens more and more eyes to the fact that your time is over. I hope that people that do that hear that.
Not only are these major industries tied to the military-industrial complex, not only do they not have to show for the things that they spent and they never get reprimanded, but most of the revenue that comes from the American people in the form of taxes, where does it go to? Most of it goes back to those military-industrial complex companies that all they do is war. They make literally a killing from killing. And that's what they do with the people's money. So it's not like the taxes that they take from us are reinvested into society and into social good. They're just reinvested into empire. Our fucking communities are crumbling, and we keep sending tens and hundreds of billions of dollars abroad to fund proxy wars with everyone who doesn't want to have our imperialist government take over their country, their resources, and their people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to this point, when I was in LA, there was and I made a video about it, the headquarters for Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and then maybe Raytheon or one more company, and they all surrounded this giant Air Force base. So that shows you the sort of connection that the military-industrial complex and these weapons contractors have to the military, and they just get handouts straight from the government, which is really money that they suck out of the American working class. Because the American working class produces all value, of course. But yeah, anything to say on that before we move on to the Cuba vid?
Just that a lot of that is going to finance and being used for, or never mind. It's too long a discussion.
One of my before we move on, one of my buddies worked for NASA too. And like the main complaint of the workers there was that NASA's really just does R&D for the military industrial complex now. So even public institutions that we have like NASA that are supposed to be focused on space exploration doing things for human ends rather than profit ends, they've been co-opted by the capitalists. So now NASA is just a bunch of scientists who want to help humanity, but really they're doing research and development for Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon. Because under capitalism, especially neoliberal capitalism, you can't divorce the state from the capitalist ruling class. The state is nothing but a tool of the capitalist ruling class that they use to suppress us and prop themselves up.
But Eddie, that's not real capitalism.
Fair enough. You've debunked me. The government, if we got rid of the government, we got rid of NASA, then we'd have real capitalism, and the military-industrial complex would be good.
Well, to answer Charles' question, it's that, yeah, that's what the progressives are asking for: raise the taxes on the rich and not working people. But when the Democrats raise taxes, it's on everyone, and the pockets that it hits most difficultly is working people's pockets. So I mean, what the fuck have the progressive Democrats given us? Where are the taxes that they've taken from the rich in order to invest in our communities, and the taxes that they've dropped for working people? It's in existence. So it still exists in this divorced ideal realm that has nothing to do with reality. So yeah, we can criticize the shit out of taxes, because as they function right now, and as they will be functioning in the near future, insofar as the political horizon stays the same, they're only affecting working people.
And not only that, where do those taxes go? Right? Look at the budget and look at the way it's set up. It's going to pay back the debt. Where does that go to? Financial institutions, right? There's a reason they keep interest rates at one rate, and then
It's just funny. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to derail your point.
I mean, look, once we get rid of the government, we just go back to everybody buying and selling everything, and we have real capitalism again, because that existed. Come on.
If we had already one revolution.
Don't you know your basic economics?
If we already did one revolution because of taxation without representation, it's time for number 2.
You know what? We are taxed without any representation right now. I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah.
True. All right. Well, let's move on to our next video then. This is from Belly of the Beast Cuba, who everybody should follow. Fantastic organization that covers Cuba and U.S. regime change efforts against Cuba, debunks all the propaganda that we get here from the Western media. So the caption of this video is, why are dozens of U.S. students getting their medical degree in Cuba? What are they learning that they wouldn't be in the U.S.? And this is interesting because on Jubilee, we got into a discussion about the Cuban healthcare system, and all the capitalists were claiming that the Cuban doctors are slaves. They're slaves to the government. They're forced to go to medical school and sent around the world like slaves to work. And that was their way of dismissing all the incredible achievements of the Cuban socialist system and the Cuban healthcare system that's brought healthcare to regions that never had it, like the rural regions, including in eastern Cuba, where the Escambray region is. It's extremely mountainous. Before the revolution, people in that region would have to walk 2-3 days to get to the nearest hospital if they could even afford it. And now they've got clinics in every town and clinics in every area, which are fully staffed, unlike a lot of the rural hospitals in the U.S., because of the amount of medical students that Cuba's pumping out. So yeah, this should be a relevant video. Oops.
Queens, New York, Austin, Texas. I live in Maryland. I'm here studying medicine in Havana, Cuba.
I'm a current 5th year at the Latin American School of Medicine.
In pretty much all of our cases, we would not have been able to afford to go to medical school in our country.
Over 200. Do you want to read that?
Over 200 U.S. doctors have graduated from ELAM since IFCO Pastors for Peace began its ELAM scholarship in 2001. So clearly, as you can see, these people are slaves. This is what you do to slaves. You educate them and you send them to medical school so they can become doctors. Yes, the capitalists were right.
The best kind of slave is a well-educated one, right?
Right. Everybody knows that. Yeah.
That's why they were teaching all the chattel slaves here when we had it to read. And yeah.
Right. And they were all becoming doctors.
Exactly.
This is a huge opportunity because you don't see nowadays that a country is giving
full ride scholarships for students who wanted to study medicine.
Program is aimed at low-income students, people that come from underserved communities.
I realized that I either had to get into debt or I had to not study medicine. And if I had to get into debt, in order for me to serve my community, I wouldn't be able to because I would have to pay back that debt.
The idea is to, once we become doctors, is to return to our low-income communities, underserved communities, and essentially serve them.
I jumped at the idea because I've only heard great stuff about Cuban doctors. Here, everybody gets treated no matter what. But over there, they're not too keen on treating you if you can't pay.
I know personally, my family, several members being uninsured for a long time. People only go to the doctor when it's an emergency.
My brother has cancer. And so my mom has good insurance, but I wonder if my mom didn't have good insurance, would they treat them as well?
Here in Cuba, we learned that treating a patient is not just giving the medicine, it's about communication.
Medicine at the community level is significantly different than medicine at the community level in the US, which is practically inexistent.
Something amazing that we get to do in this program.
So that's something interesting too, because we want universal healthcare in the US, but there's also a bunch of things that are wrong with our healthcare system because it's a capitalistic healthcare system and it's more concerned with making a profit than with making people well. So there's not a lot of preventative medicine. There's not a lot of what they call medicine at the community level and being ingrained with the community. There's not a lot of holistic approaches to medicine saying, what can we change in your lifestyle or looking at things holistically to try and help people live a healthier life. It's more so, what are your symptoms and what can I sell you to cover those symptoms up, whether it be a medicine from the pharmaceutical industry, like opioids and painkillers, or whether it be a surgery, which that's how they make a lot of their money is pushing surgery on people. And a lot of surgeries that are given out in the US and medicines that are given out in the US could be avoided, or they're not necessary if we would invest more in preventative medicine and what they call medicine at the community level. So socialism is not about just nationalizing the insurance industry and keeping our current healthcare system so that and making it universally available to people. We do want universally available healthcare. But we need to radically change our healthcare system and make it based on human wellness and the wellness of society rather than making a profit. And in the Journal of American Socialist Studies 2, I wrote about this in depth and how the capitalist healthcare system is rotten to the core because of the contradictions that exist within a capitalist mode of production.
Yeah,
That's
Carlos, would you be able to give us like an overview of the Cuban system and how doctors in neighborhoods function there? Because it's absolutely amazing.
I don't know about an overview. We're trying to get as fast as we can through this, but I can point people to some of I've done a lot of work in this area. This is an article that I do on the theory of depression, the serotonin theory of depression, and I debunk it. And in the last section of the article, I compare Cuban medicines and I talk about the polyclinic model and the more dialectical way of understanding these illnesses. And it's rooted in a deep understanding of the role of the community and people's environments in shaping things like mental health crises, which is something mentioned by the students there, the very communal level. And in this one on the U.S. blockade and its effects on Cuban medicine, I do go in a little bit more in depth into the polyclinic model, what its benefits are, and how it allows us to prevent the sort of pill first approach to medicine that we have here in the West, which we have here in the West precisely because it's the most profitable one. And in Cuba, you actually have the essence of medicine, of the Hippocratic Oath embodied, because medicine is done for the sake not just of curing the sick, but of being preventative, of preventing the conditions that make people sick in the first place and keeping communities healthy by promoting, healthy lifestyles. In the U.S., you don't have that. In the U.S., you get pill first, and the goal of medicine, as any of the other commodified institutions, is to make your profit at the end of the day. So whereas the goal of medicine is almost like auto-abolitional, it's to destroy the conditions that make medicine even necessary in the first place. In the U.S., it's proliferation. You want more medicine because more medicine means more treatment, which means more profit. So the fact that poor students from the U.S. can go to Cuba, get an education that doesn't put them in tremendous debt, go back, serve their poorer communities without having to worry about getting jobs that allow them to make so much money that they can pay off the incredible debt that they accrued going to school is, obviously very good, but it also shows them the distinctions between Cuban medicine and American medicine, and it becomes clear to them which one is superior. And given that they're in a socialist society, they'll obviously have the capacity to have people explain to them, from a more theoretical angle, why it is superior.
Is that starting second year, we get to see patients, we get to work with a doctor, with a nurse in the consultorium.
They have learned more empathy and community. And I feel like in America, we really don't have a strong community base.
Despite the shortages, due to the blockade, due to, the current economic situation, you see how the community tries to connect the patients with what they need.
I've definitely learned solidarity with people, being there for people, even in the hardest of moments, because that's what medicine really is. Medicine is really empathy.
I'm from San Francisco, California.
So incredible stuff. And, I went on Jubilee this week and had capitalists claiming that the Cuban doctors are slaves. They're slaves. Right. What about it in the US, where in order to go to medical school, even if you have the ability to do it, you're going to be drowning in debt. Right. Or there's all these barriers to entry based on money. Like these people here could have been doctors. They had the ability or potential to become doctors, but they couldn't afford it. Right. So they go to Cuba and they get trained up. Is that slavery? That's what slavery is to you, when you give people free medical school and have more doctors so that they can serve the people in the rural regions of your country. And I've written an article about rural healthcare in the U.S. And in that article, I compared what's going on in the American rural healthcare system to what's going on in the Cuban healthcare, or in rural areas in Cuba. And you see that over the last decade, over 100 rural hospitals in America have shut down just because it's not profitable to bring healthcare to that area, or we don't have enough medical professionals to staff it, because most medical professionals in the U.S. just become specialists and try and work in a big city and make a lot of money. Whereas in Venezuela and Cuba, much poorer countries who are under sanction and embargo, they've been able to vastly increase the amount of healthcare access that their rural residents have. So, to dismiss that incredible accomplishment and just say, well, it's slavery. It's slavery. They're forcing these people to become doctors. It's such an idiotic argument.
It really is, especially when you compare it to what is actually controlling the way someone acts. Like, think about it. We force them, we withhold this education and force them to go to our financial institutions, which is the ruling class, and take out debt, right? That is how those financial institutions, one, unbalance the economy, and two, make their money, right? By the interest on that debt. If you want to help people, you must pay this bank. That's what it is. Then they got you the rest of your life. You need to make a certain amount. So not just to have your wage, which is yours, but to also pay them back and the interest on that wage. That value has to come from somewhere, right? It comes out of you. That's what we call extraction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I go deeper into this in a recent dossier that was put out by one of the leading magazines in Cuba, theoretical magazine Temas. So if anyone reads Spanish, my article is here. It's the paradox of the United States, social and individual rights. And I really focus on, the rights of healthcare. And I use the papers that Eddie has done, both the one that he did for Jazz 2 and the one that he did on the American rural healthcare crisis, to describe how it is that the U.S. completely drops the ball on meeting these social rights that we're supposed to be meeting according to the UN. And then I expand on how, without meeting any of these social rights, we can't even meet the individual rights that we enunciate as central to the American project. But that was a great informational video from Belly of the Beast.
Let
Oh,
me
yeah, go ahead.
real quick, Carlos, because you very nonchalantly skipped over the part where you're being published in one of the top theoretical journals in Cuba.
Oh,
Congratulations, brother. That's great. I know I said that, you know, on the phone before, but
yeah, it's the English. There's going to be a long and an elongated English version of it in the 3rd issue of Jazz, so you'd be able to read it in English there. And we're almost done preparing Jazz. We have a couple articles being refined and coming in from some acclimated scholars, but besides that, everything's ready to go. It's an extremely special issue, and I feel like every year we try to outdo ourselves with the journal, and I think we're definitely going to do that this year.
Absolutely. I can't wait. I'm finally doing my anti-imperialism and hindsight article. So I've been talking about doing that one forever. Sean Moon, $10 super chat. Thank you, brother. Multiple super chats from Sean Moon today. Really appreciate that. Appreciate all the super chats that we've been getting and all of our Patreon supporters as well. Obviously, it's a people's funded institute. We're not funded by billionaires or by China or Russia or whoever you think might be funding us. Everything we have comes from you, the people, and that's what our content is based on, helping you, the people. There's no outside interest controlling our positions or controlling our coverage. So to help keep it that way, patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. But thank you all. The documentary on natural causes is available for free on YouTube. It is all about how capitalism gets in your body and kills you early. The capitalist health system is euthanasia by neglect. Yeah, it sounds interesting. I've never seen on natural causes. It sounds like a good documentary, but I agree. And the book, The Second Sickness by Howard Waitskin, kind of talks about that. It's The Second Sickness, Contradictions of Capitalist Healthcare. It's a Marxist analysis of the capitalist healthcare system and the way that capitalism overworks us, makes us sick and induces us with illnesses that then the capitalist healthcare system profits off of and is woefully inept at actually solving. So that's another good resource. Maybe I'll check out the Unnatural Causes movie, though. That sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, and this is something that the Marxist tradition has been on for a while. You can look back at Engels's The Conditions of the Working Class in England, and he's treating sickness as what it is, largely a social phenomenon that's pushed on the poor because of the environmental conditions that they're forced to live in and because of the conditions that they find in their workplaces. And when you are a scientist or a doctor and you're trying to investigate a sickness, you come across this contradiction where the vast majority of the things that you encounter in people are rooted in their occupation and the fact that they're working people and forced to work in these unhealthy environments or forced to live in these unhealthy conditions. I myself, I was basically not forced, but I lived for 4 years in an apartment where the mold was horrific. It affected my health. It affected my wife's health. I remember that I was sick basically every other month pretty badly. And my wife suffered similar symptoms. And it was the place we could afford. We couldn't really move anywhere else. And every time we told the landlords about it, they wouldn't do anything. I had to threaten them with suing them and bringing one of my law professors in. And that's the only way that they were able to fix it. And as soon as they fixed it, they jacked up the rent by $100, which when you're an undergraduate student is hard hitting. So these conditions still exist. They're not as bad as they were in the 1840s when Engels was analyzing it. But the reason why they're not that bad is because of working class people's struggles and victories and the concessions that we've been able to win through these class struggles from the capitalist class.
For sure. Great point. Do you want to wait for Noah before we go to the next video, or should we just go?
He says he needs 5 minutes. I think we should probably go. We're on a clock here.
Yeah,
but
let's just jump into it then. This next video, another short one, I actually don't know what this is. This it looks like it has something to do with Israel Palestine. I'll let Carlos.
This is an Orthodox Jew. I forget his name, but he's quite popular. He's been interviewed quite a few times in prominent podcasts. But here he's talking about the foundation of Israel and the really non-religious character of that foundation, and what we'd call imperialist and politically motivated character of the foundation of the state of Israel.
Let's check it out.
Empty land. And if anybody stood up against them, they said because you hate the Jews and you're an anti-Semite. They treat us like the worst terrorists in the world. When a boy or girl turns 17, they become a criminal, even if they're not demonstrating, because we refuse to serve in the IDF. They yell at me as a Holocaust denier when my grandparents were killed in Auschwitz. My father escaped Hungary when the Nazis came in. My father was in Auschwitz. Almost the entire families were wiped out. I live and breathe Holocaust. How dare they claim that we're Holocaust deniers? But that's just part of that, the vile Zionism, that they have the power of the most expensive PR and the power of AIPAC that influences, put pressure on politicians to be silent. That is what they're afraid of. The people who stand up and reveal the truth, that Judaism is a beautiful, and we live together with Muslims, and we are thankful to Muslims, and we don't want what's happening to the Palestinians. We cry with the Palestinian suffering. That is what they're afraid of. The world will wake up. Right at the beginning, when they said, oh, it's an empty land. And if anybody stood up and...
So that's extremely important, because as we've been saying here from the start, one of the first most fervent anti-Zionists have been the Jewish people themselves. And right now there was just a bill that passed that allows the legal equation of Zionism, of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which is wrong in so many ways that we have explored very thoroughly over the last 60 some days. But this is a good example of how deeply anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish the Zionist state is at its very core. And as Katie Halper said a while back, it isn't a state that's making Jewish people safer. It's making them less safe. And it's putting on the crimes of empire, some of the worst crimes that I think we've ever seen. It's putting the Star of David. And there's no way in hell that is good for Jewish people, most of whom, or a significant portion of whom, are anti-Zionist and against the current apartheid occupational form the state of Israel takes.
Yeah, I just can't get over the fact that the U.S. government considers this man to be an anti-Semite. I mean, that on its face, look at him. Look, does that look like an anti-Semite to you? No, clearly this is a Jewish man. And as you hear him say, a lot of his family was exterminated in the Holocaust. So the U.S. government officially, because of the recent congressional resolution that passed that Carlos just mentioned, officially considers this person to be an anti-Semite. The warmongers and the corrupt ghouls in Congress consider this person to be anti-Semitic and other Orthodox Jews who stand up against Israel. I mean, it's just peak absurdity. It is peak absurdity to be calling Orthodox Jews whose families were exterminated in the Holocaust anti-Semitic. It's almost as absurd as the narrative that there were no Palestinians in Palestine prior to the Jews arriving there, which he also mentions. And there was a famous book written by Joan Peters. Noam Chomsky has speculated that the book was written by the CIA because Joan Peters basically came out of nowhere to publish this book about Israel that conveniently parroted or tried to make a scholarly argument for the Zionist claim that there was nobody in Palestine, that it was empty prior to them arriving, called From Time Immemorial. And Norman Finkelstein has spent a lot of effort systematically debunking that book and showing it to be an absolute hoax, and exercise in manipulating statistics to try and make it seem like the Palestinian people were never living there without proof, when of course they were. But if anybody sees through these Zionist myths, if anybody tries to tell the truth, they get called an anti-Semite, because the Zionists know that if you go to the scholarship, if you actually study the history, the truth is not on their side. The truth makes them look very, very bad. So they have to make up this mythical history, this magic utopian history that only exists in their heads, and then say everybody who doesn't believe our version of history is an anti-Semite, even if you're literally a freaking Orthodox Jew. So now we are in this absurd position where the U.S. government is declaring Orthodox Jews to be anti-Semitic because they're against Israel's apartheid and genocide.
And that's how you know that they're the real anti-Jewish folks. They're the real anti-Semites. And, you know, some of the people at the front of the U.S. protests against this ongoing genocide of Gaza have been Jewish voices for peace. You know, some of the protests they have done, as many of you in the audience know, we don't support. We consider some of them counterproductive in the form that they take. You know, they just end up becoming inconvenience for regular working people. But nonetheless, some of the other ones that they've done, where they become inconveniences for politicians and the elite, have been tremendously impressive. So, yes, it's incredible that they can sit there and make this equation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism in the face of the reality that the most staunch anti-Zionists are Jewish people.
Oh, 100%. And you know, if you think about it, what were we talking about at the beginning? Stalin, right? Soviet history. They do this same sort of thing to Soviet history, right? Where there's false views put out, and you really have to dig into it to understand the truth and unravel it. And the parallel here is that they don't give up when a tactic works. They only escalate it, right? And so this is exactly what they do to us now. The book that Noam Chomsky was saying was probably written by a CIA agent. There are literal British intelligence agents like Robert Conquest who are writing books about the Soviet Union. That is the primary source for a lot of these conspiracy theories about dictatorships and Stalin eating everybody's babies and their babies, right? That is the primary source. And people just don't look at that, right? It takes someone actually dedicated to figuring out the real history of communism to do that. And what does that do? It turns you into a communist. Also, sorry, I'm kind of here and there. I'm the cook in my house, and this got extended longer than I thought. So I'm running downstairs, starting dinner, and we have a whole lasagna thing going. So I apologize, everybody.
The family, man. Gotta handle the lasagna. I understand. Do you guys want to...
important.
It is. Do you guys want to do one little Hassan Piker segment and then wrap up? Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, let's do it. Yeah. So I had a couple things written down from Hassan. Like I said, he disagreed with me bringing up the DPRK or had some disagreements about the DPRK. So I'm right now trying to create an effort on Twitter to get myself on Hassan Piker's show and on TikTok. So go to our TikTok and tag Hassan Piker, or go to our Twitter under the tweet where I'm trying to get his attention and tag him. Tell him to have me on the show for a discussion so we could talk about the DPRK and, you know, areas of agreement. So hopefully I'll handle the DPRK thing with Hassan. But what I wanted to bring up here was this guy, Cam, asks me, how do you set prices in a nationalized healthcare system or in a socialist healthcare system? And Hassan answers what I answered when we reacted to the Jubilee Middle Ground episode on the Midwestern Marx YouTube. I said, you set them based on cost. You have people pay for the healthcare services what they actually cost to produce, rather than paying what they cost plus what it takes to pay the profits of shareholders and giant pharmaceutical companies, which is what we pay now, which greatly inflates prices. And then Hassan even brings up a video of medical prices being negotiated in China and showing how they do it. So I thought we could check that out.
Can I real quick just was he trying to say like economic calculation problem, that thing?
Yes.
Jesus
yes, that's
Christ.
their only argument.
How do people still believe in that in 2023?
It's hard to believe.
By the way, I wonder here if this is racially motivated. Future Homestead is calling our friend here Ratatouille. The only Jewish person on this panel is getting called a rat. I don't appreciate that. What's going on, Future Homestead? I expect more of you than these debased racist jokes. No, I'm just fucking with you.
Future Homestead is anti-Semitic confirmed. The Midwestern Marx audience is anti-Semitic.
As a Jew.
Wait till they find out Noah's Jewish. They're going to stop watching.
What didn't work?
We have not seen a decrease in the rate of people who are in poverty. And part of this is based on the education system. Part of this is based on different...
Because of LBJ.
Yeah. These programs that came in, the welfare, I don't know this because of it. I think it's stagnated work that was being done. For me, as somebody who works in public policy, that's what I'm interested in. What works?
There are cases where I think people are incentivized to work less hard in order.
Eddie, you're muted.
I have the wrong timestamp here. Let me get the right one. Where did I write that down? Oh,
this is the professionalism of the Midwestern Marx Institute.
Right.
Look at us go.
Where is it? Oh, maybe it is here. Maybe it comes up in a sec.
To keep their income under a certain level so they can collect a certain amount of, government money to be taken away. And we have a problem in this country where 45,000 people are dying every single year because they don't have access to basic health insurance. And I think if we were to nip that in the bud and nationalize those giant pharmaceutical companies and make sure that healthcare is provided to everyone, we would actually...
Also, as far as novel chemical compound development goes, the overwhelming majority of publicly funded research contributes to that dramatically, and every other country with socialized healthcare systems and better publicly, like more ease of access to public institutions all the way up to college, unironically perform better than the United States of America in per capita novel chemical compound development. America obviously beats the rest of the world in totality because we have a shit ton of people here and a shit ton of brain drain. However, when you look at those metrics, European countries still beat America on novel chemical compound development per capita, which means that they make more with less. Those are less costly initiatives for the most part, and they yield better results. So it's not even efficient.
They stimulate a lot of innovation, a lot of labor, and a lot of hard work in this country because people would be less bogged down by medical bills and would be more healthy in general.
So without a market, if the pharmaceutical industry specifically is nationalized, how does the state set prices effectively?
Before you get to that point, did you want to say?
What do you mean? Wait, what?
It doesn't make any sense.
How does he think this happens in China?
It doesn't make any sense. They just think. They just believe in the economic calculation problem like it's a dogma, right? They claim, no, you can't set prices based on cost. No, even though there are all sorts of countries who do this in practice, those aren't real. Because of the economic calculation problem, we can't nationalize anything. Otherwise, there won't be prices. Yes, there will be. You just charge based on cost. And it's not like the market per se totally goes away. There's still goods and services being exchanged, meaning there's still supply and there's still demand, which is what the neoclassicals claim is the setter of prices. So this argument doesn't make any sense.
Not only that, giant conglomerates do this all the time. Like within the ECP was flawed when it came out, but the fact that we've had computers capable of giving people inputs for like 50 years and they've been used for that long just makes it seem silly and makes them seem ideological. Like every economy of scale is planned, period. The question is who is doing the planning and in whose interests?
Yep.
By cost, by how much it costs. That's it. Like what do you mean?
Oh, that's great that he got it right.
Yeah, that's great. Good for his son.
To the developers, and that's how you do it.
And he's also a little bit confused, like I was. Like, what do you even mean?
Right.
What do you mean? How do you set prices? Yeah. It's only if you believe in this dogmatic idea of the ECP that there are no prices under a nationalized system that you would even think that.
There is literally I think this is the video that I know you're going to point. Yeah, here it is. Here's how China negotiates its drug prices after 3 initial offers from the farmer rep. What a government that actually seeks the best interest of its people looks like. But this is also similar to. I don't have authorization for a lower price. Official says 4.62 per pill. I feel there's still some room left. With such a big market in China, I will give you 5 minutes to call your CEO for a price. By the way, this is like, if I'm not mistaken, this is literally not the state nationalized pharmaceutical company. This is a pharmaceutical company from a European or American pharmaceutical corporation that wants to enter the Chinese market. This bargaining process occurs in every country. We did not need to use a Chinese example for this. We can use an example from every other country with the exception of the United States of America. Every single country on the fucking planet, in every single developing nation, in every single developed nation, every single nation across the board, this bargaining agreement occurs before a drug enters the marketplace. America is the only country where this process that you are watching doesn't have to be China. Okay, remember, imagine these guys are white, and imagine they're speaking not a scary language like Mandarin, but instead a language that you understand, like American English. Okay, well, not American English, but okay, Canada, actually, well, Canada has negotiations as well, pharmaceutical price negotiations. So yeah, imagine if they're speaking English in the UK English. Ooh, not scary. They're white now. Okay, they're white and they're speaking in English in the UK, and they're like, "Oh, bruv, you want this fucking medicine into the fucking market, yeah?" And then the other guy's like, "Oh no, mate, my CEO told me I can't fucking send this drug into the market in it. It's too low of a price." And the guy's like, "You want a fucking license? You better call up your CEO, mate, and fucking tell him we're not buying unless it's cheaper." And then the guy's like, "Fuck, no, all right, innit? What about my profit incentive?" And then the guy goes, "We know you're making profit. It doesn't fucking matter. It's going to sell like fucking hotcakes, yeah?" And then boom, all of a sudden, they arrive at a price point that is more manageable. And that's how you keep pharmaceutical prices low in every other country, with the exception of the United States of America, where that process is illegal, with the exception of with the VA, which Obama changed on his way out. And that's slowly started to sneak into like insulin, I guess. But the reality is that it's illegal to do pharmaceutical price negotiations in the United States of America.
So there you go.
God, that was awesome.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he's hilarious, but not wrong. The idea that this is like the prices that they're paying are just magically worked out by this market is just beyond silly. You know, like, oh, people all say, "Well, no, we don't think we'll pay the 562." And they're like, "Well, fuck, what are we going to do? I mean, what are we going to do, Governor?" Right? Like, Jesus Christ. I don't understand how otherwise intelligent people just shut their brains off and go, "Yeah, that must be how it works." These corporations are just like, whatever people want, we give it at that price. That is the silliest way of doing it. Prices are set before you buy anything. There's production costs, labor costs, like all that goes into it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the vast majority of, so I was looking through the comments and trying to like categorize them as best as I could on the original Jubilee video. And there seems to be different sorts of comments. There's the comments that are just using racist stereotypes against Malumbo, which we talked about that when he was on. I hadn't seen the comments yet. I saw him after, and I was like, holy shit, he was fucking right as fuck. There's the comments that are like kind of like praising Eddie and you know, saying that the communist side won. And then there's the comments that are like telling Jubilee how they could do these sorts of debates better, whether it's like letting them last longer than most people are used to listening to podcasts, or doing things like letting people bring in stats and notebooks and all these other things and making it explicit that they can do that. So I think that the reception was pretty good. Guys, we are in the USA. We have had billions of dollars spent by our government to make us as anti-communist as possible. The fact that Eddie and Malumbo and other people can go on to defend communism in front of millions of people, and the reception is not 99% negative, is a huge fucking win. The reception has been, I want to say, largely positive to our side. And then it gets picked up by people by Hassan, who, I don't watch him, but every time I've seen him, it almost seems like he's getting better and better and better as time goes by, which is the natural tendency of people who study. And then hundreds of thousands or millions of people see it through him. I don't know how big his audience is. So I think if we step back and we look at what this represents in terms of like the transformation of the social consciousness of the American people is incredible. I don't think we have ever been in U.S. history at a time quite like our own, where so many people, especially young folks, are open to the ideas of communism and debating them openly in forums such as these.
Exactly, and it's getting harder to reject our arguments, right? It's getting harder to deny, partially because of the growth of a socialist superpower like China and everything that they've been able to accomplish. As our buddy Diego Rusarin says, it makes it a lot easier to argue for communism, or China's making it easy because, they can, like when the economic calculation problem first came about in like the early 1920s, von Mises was saying, there can be no economic calculation ever. It's impossible to calculate a socialist economy, period. Trust me. And now we can pull up a video of them calculating prices in China and negotiating prices in China and be like, what are you talking about, Mr. Cam Higby? What do you mean you can't calculate prices? They're literally doing it, as Hassan said, not even just in China, but in every country in the world, because we're the only country that doesn't have any form of public health care or any kind of public health care system. So socialism is becoming undeniable, right? Because what communism is the real movement of history. And what Marxist theory is actually, a blueprint for building a superior economic system to capitalism that actually takes care of the people and allows them to flourish rather than exploiting them for more and more and more profit. And we're seeing that reality. We're seeing it with the Cuban healthcare system. We're seeing it with China's overall economic development. We're seeing it with the Belt and Road Initiative, right? And it's becoming undeniable that socialism is a superior system to capitalism. And we're getting more and more and more and more young Americans who know their theory, who know their shit, who know their history, who know the history of existing socialist countries, and they can no longer be lied to by this imperialist propaganda. Voice crack. Not only are they immune to the imperialist propaganda themselves, or largely immune, I guess none of us are fully immune, but not only do they have the theoretical background to deconstruct it themselves, but they're teaching it to others and they're explaining it to others. And then people are growing up with alternative information and alternative narratives about communism that the boomers and older generations never got, because communism was completely ripped out of academia, out of entertainment media, and out of the news media. So we're moving in the right direction, folks. And that's why Hassan Piker needs to have me on his show.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. China, the example.
No, 1 second. I was talking. I thought I was muted though. That's all fine and dandy, Eddie, but that voice crack was beta. So it ruins everything. It's a red pill moment of the day, I guess.
But
I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
Yeah, the example of China forces China to deal with the real world, right, in a way that they haven't been able to before, or haven't been forced to before. And I sort of specialize in flipping libertarians, right? Because really, when you get down to it, they're basing things on their sort of moral sense. And then that gets sort of moved in certain places. And when you say, like, when they tell you communism never worked, and you go, but here's a picture of Beijing, they're like, oh, well, yeah, yes, but that's capitalism. And I'm like, okay, call it capitalism. I don't care. But every time it's like, but they free market and blah, blah, blah. And when you really boil down to this problem, you get to what lies beneath this economic calculation problem. It's that when you say the word value and wealth, etc., what people are trained to think is opinion, right? Because every time you talk about, they're like, the law of value. What? Value is subjective. No, what they really get told value is someone's opinion on a thing. And you just go, look, man, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the real cost of things that goes into making things. And then you don't even have to dwell in that because everything is financialized now. Guess what? Speculation is far more destructive. And that's what's primary now in our economy rather than the direct sale of commodities.
And that neoclassical subjectivism is so rooted in the transformations of bourgeois ideology. And Eddie has a great paper connecting neoclassical economics to postmodernism and tracing out how the homologies and the philosophical foundations and the assumptions of both of them. And, at its core, I think whether there's been a tendency that comes from, I believe it was Hayek, but it's accepted. Hayek, by the way, is the guy that I think Cam is crafting.
It started with Mises. I believe Mises wrote the economic calculation problem, and then Hayek picked it up and wrote another one later on. I want to say that's how it worked. I haven't read it in a while, but it's the stupidest thing ever if you actually read it.
Right. But the what I was going to say is that the Cam is trying to look like Hayek physically, but there's this idea that is in Ludwig von Mises that you either have capitalism or a planned economy, and that idea is accepted by a whole lot of socialists because they accept the binary of capitalism means market, socialism means planned. And that's absurd. Both planning and markets have been institutional forms that are universal. That means that they have existed across different modes of life, and they function in accordance to the mode of life that they're in. So markets and planned institutional forms under socialism function completely different than what they do under capitalism. And the proof is literally right in front of us. Look at how markets function in China. Look at how planning functions in the US. Is Walmart a socialist fucking company? No, of course not. Are the markets in China, do they operate like capitalist markets where only a small group of people get richer and richer and richer and everyone can go fuck themselves? Of course not. So the proof is in the pudding. Today, it is absurd to talk about this binary when we're seeing both institutional forms applied to different particular modes of life and resulting in completely different outcomes.
Absolutely. Great point. I'm going to have to leave here because I have wrestling practice soon. Hashtag no days off. But wanted to thank you all for doing this stream. And thanks to all our listeners. And shout out to Ian McGregor, Conor McGregor there, becoming a YouTube member. And I want to say there were a lot of memberships given out today and a lot of new members. Make sure you go to the community tab and click the link to join our Discord that YouTube members and Patreons get access to. And if you're a $10 member, check out Carlos's book, The Purity, Fetish, and the Crisis of Western Marxism. Super, super important book, in addition to Marxist theory and an attempt to develop Marxist theory even further and develop a Marxist analysis of the U.S. So super important book. I hope everybody reads it. And yeah, thanks for streaming with me, fellas.
Thank you so much. We'll be heading out with you. Thank you to all who watched. Thank you to all who donated. It's a people's funded institute, so these donations are tremendously appreciated. Thank you to Ted. Thank you to Andreas. Thank you to Comrade Trotsky. Doug Hashbrowns, thank you so much. Andreas again. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Doug. Doug Hashbrowns came in today heavy. Thank you. Thank you, Sean Moon. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Ewan. Thank you so much to everyone. We'll get going. We'll see you next time, probably tomorrow, if not the day after. Thank you, all of you, for joining, and we'll see you in a couple days. Peace and solidarity.
injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.